You were taught that elections change policy, cast the ballot, flip the seat, redirect the nation. And that's true, but to a point. Elections usually don't move individuals inside an existing framework. Assassinations tend to reset the framework itself. McKinley dies and Roosevelt remakes the American empire almost overnight. Lincoln falls and Reconstruction slowly disappears before it ever takes shape. Kennedy's motorcade enters Dealey Plaza, and the Vietnam briefing rooms change hands. If you actually look at the last century of major American policy reversals, most of them don't follow a ballot. They follow a body. And the important thing is this. They don't just change the players. They change the board underneath the players. By the end of this video, I want you to understand the mechanics of that. Not the mythology around it, but the mechanics. Welcome back to Hidden Forces in History. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate, CEO of Command Your Brand. Check us out at commandyourbrand.com. A quick note before we get into this video. Some of you have been asking for sources in the videos. In our early videos, we used sources in the story, and it became almost unlistenable. So we're going to be adding sources to the description for those of you that want to back it up and do further study. So let's start with a definition. Not the academic version, a real one. A policy framework just isn't a law. It isn't a president. It isn't even a political party. Actually, at least not primarily. A policy framework is the architecture underneath everything. It's who controls the procurement contracts, who controls the agency budgets, who controls the banking relationships that finance legislation in the first place, who controls the intelligence networks briefing the people making the decisions. Those structures don't appear on ballots. They don't rotate every 4 years. And they don't disappear when administrations change hands. They persist. They adapt. And when necessary, they wait. Think about it this way. You can replace the engineer on a locomotive. But if the tracks were laid 30 years ago, if the rail companies own the land, the supply depots, the fuel infrastructure on both sides, the train still goes where the track was designed to go. Elections swap engineers. Assassinations rip up the track and lay new rail. And that's just not rhetoric. That's what historical record keeps showing, case after case, policy by policy, body by body. April 14th, 1865. Abraham Lincoln is shot in Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. He dies the next morning. Most people know that part of the story, but most people stop there. What they usually don't examine is what died with him, because it wasn't only a man, it was a policy architecture that had not fully solidified yet. Lincoln had a post-war vision for the South through Reconstruction, and at its core, it threatened something very specific, something financial. Start with land. The plantation system wasn't just cultural. It wasn't simply racial hierarchy institutionalized into law, though obviously it was that too. It was collateral infrastructure. Southern plantations held titles that backed regional banking systems. Those banks financed the cotton trade. The cotton trade fed the textile mills in New England and in Lancaster, England as well. So the financial chain runs all the way from forced labor in Mississippi to counting houses in London. And once you see that, the whole thing changes. Because destroying the plantation system doesn't just alter labor relations. It fractures the collateral structure underneath an international commodity network. That's not ideology. That's balance sheet mathematics. And then there's the labor itself. The South's export economy, cotton, sugar, tobacco, depended on forced labor margins. The free labor force, and suddenly wages exist. Negotiated wages. And the cost structure feeding both Northern and British mills changes immediately. The margins collapse. Then representation. The 14th Amendment creates citizenship for formerly enslaved Americans, which means congressional representation, which means a potential federal power realignment. So what Southern financial interests, and honestly many Northern interests tied into them, were staring at was not just social change. It was systematic reset. John Wilkes Booth gets remembered as an angry actor, but Booth moved inside Confederate intelligence circles. He had financial backers. There were coordinated attacks planned simultaneously against the Secretary of State and the Vice President. This wasn't just one unstable man improvising violence. It was a political operation, and what follows tells you exactly who benefited. Andrew Johnson takes office. Within months, he vetoes the Civil Rights Act. He restores confiscated land to former Confederate planters. He blocks redistribution efforts to freed slaves. So the legal scaffolding of Reconstruction begins getting dismantled almost before it fully exists. And what replaces slavery isn't freedom in any meaningful economic sense. It's debt, crop liens, tenant farming, credit dependency. Former slaves owe rent to landowners. They owe seed money to merchants. The merchants owe the banks. And the debt instruments backing all of it are held by essentially the same financial class that just survived the Civil War. So the plantation survives, not in its original legal form. More precisely, it reorganizes itself into debt infrastructure. And versions of that system last another century. That's what Lincoln's death protects. Not just political stability, not national mourning. A financial architecture the war was supposed to destroy. So now let's move forward 36 years. September 6th, 1901. William McKinley is shot in the Pan-American Exposition in Buffalo. He dies 8 days later. Theodore Roosevelt becomes president. Most historical analysis focus on Roosevelt himself, his personality, his energy, the mythology around him. And all of that's real, but the deeper story is the framework waiting behind him. McKinley's politics were fundamentally domestic. Protectionism, industrial tariffs, American manufacturing serving American markets. Protect the steelworker in Pittsburgh. Protect the factory system in Ohio. That was the center of McKinley's political identity. But another faction wanted something much larger, empire. Not just trade access, actual global infrastructure, colonies, naval stations, shipping routes, resource control. And they had very concrete assets in mind. The Panama Canal route. Whoever controls those 50 miles controls the Atlantic-Pacific trade movement. The Philippines, tobacco, sugar, coconut oil, and Manila Bay. Pacific coaling stations like Guam and Wake Island that allow a permanent two-ocean navy. This isn't abstract geopolitics, it's infrastructure architecture. McKinley accepted the Spanish-American War under heavy pressure, but even afterward, he still approached expansion cautiously. He still thought domestically first. Roosevelt didn't. Within months, he pushes through the Panama Canal Agreement. Soon after, American naval power backs Panama's separation from Colombia, securing control of the canal zone indefinitely. Then comes the Roosevelt Corollary. And honestly, this is the moment people should stop and really pay attention. The Roosevelt Corollary states that if Latin American nations cannot repay debts to European creditors, the United States reserves the right to intervene militarily to ensure repayment. Read that again carefully. American military force enforcing international banking obligations at gunpoint. This isn't just foreign policy, it's financial enforcement architecture operating through naval power, battleships, coal logistics, steel contracts, maritime infrastructure. McKinley's protectionism doesn't naturally produce that system. It requires someone who believes American economic survival depends on global expansion, foreign markets, foreign resources, military enforcement abroad. Roosevelt was that man. And after September 14th, 1901, the framework changes rapidly. Now we can get to the case that dominates American assassination history. In fact, we have a video with Roger Stone on it. November 22nd, 1963. And most of the debate always circles around the same question: who fired the shots? But honestly, that's probably the wrong starting point. The more important question is, what policy changed afterward? In October of 1963, Kennedy signs NESM 263. Most Americans have never heard of it. It orders the withdrawal of 1,000 military advisors from Vietnam by the end of the year, with broader withdrawals planned in 1964 after the election. Kennedy had seen the classified assessments. He had private conversations, documented conversations. He made clear he did not believe the Pentagon's escalation strategy would succeed. He was moving toward an exit. Then he dies before the election ever happens. Johnson is sworn in, of course, won. 4 days later, NASM 273 is signed, and the direction reverses. Escalation, 4 days. Now look at what reversal means in physical terms. Bell helicopter. The Huey becomes the defining aircraft of the Vietnam War. Over 7,000 units are delivered. That's over $1 billion in contracts in 1960 money. That contract landscape exists because the escalation exists. Dow Chemical, napalm, Agent Orange. Millions of acres are sprayed. Long-term chemical contracts sustained by prolonged war. Brown and Root, a Texas construction company deeply tied financially to Lyndon Johnson for decades. They build bases, logistics infrastructure, and airfields. Escalation expands the contracts. Every troop increase expands the contracts. Then there's Air America, the CIA's covert airline network operating across Laos, Burma, Thailand, the Golden Triangle. Weapons, personnel, and according to multiple investigations, narcotics logistics tied into the opium infrastructure. This isn't peripheral. It's parallel economy operating inside wartime structure. And all of it depends on continued American presence in Vietnam. Kennedy's withdrawal plan threatens not just defense contractors. It threatens intelligence infrastructure, budgets, assets, operational justification. Johnson's escalation feeds the entire war machine and intelligence machine. By 1968, there are over 500,000 American troops in Vietnam. 58,000 Americans are dead. Millions of Vietnamese are dead as well. Over $100 billion is spent. That's the ledger entry attached to NASM 273. And that's what 4 days of policy reversal produces. Most people remember 1968 as chaos. Riots, assassinations, Chicago, political violence everywhere. And yes, it was chaos. But chaos doesn't necessarily mean randomness. Robert Kennedy represented a very particular institutional threat. He'd been Attorney General. He'd sat inside classified briefings. He knew what the CIA organized crime overlap connected to the Bay of Pigs. And privately, sometimes publicly, though more carefully, he signaled those networks would face renewed scrutiny if he became president. That alone made him dangerous to certain institutions. But there was another layer to it. His coalition. RFK assembled something neither political party could fully control. Black urban voters, Cesar Chavez and organized Latino labor. Working-class white voters drifting towards Wallace, but still responsive to economic populism. And that coalition threatened the direction the Democratic Party was beginning to go. It was going towards finance capital, toward corporate interest networks, toward affluent professional class liberalism, disconnected from labor economics. RFK's language around redistribution, anti-poverty spending, and corporate concentration threatened that transition. He wasn't manageable, and on July 5th, 1968, at the Ambassador Hotel, he wins California, walks through the kitchen, and gets shot. Humphrey takes the nomination and loses to Nixon. And from there, the long realignment accelerates. McGovern-Fraser reforms democratized the nomination system officially, but they also weakened organized labor's institutional grip over party financing. By the late 70s, corporate money flows heavily into both parties. By the 90s, Democrats signed financial deregulation themselves. Glass-Steagall disappears. The New Deal coalition effectively dissolves. And the neoliberal framework becomes the bipartisan operating consensus. That trajectory begins crystallizing in that hotel kitchen, not because RFK dies, but because the coalition threatening the transition dies with him. Now the hardest case to see clearly, because Reagan survives. March 30th, 1981, John Hinckley Jr. opens fire outside the Washington Hilton. Reagan is critically wounded. The most historical treatments reduce this to an interesting near miss. But watch what happens afterward. Before the shooting, Reagan's economic agenda faces friction. Tax cuts are getting negotiated downward. Deficit concerns exist among even Republicans. Then the shooting happens. Reagan survives, jokes with surgeons, projects resilience, and politically something shifts almost immediately. His capital explodes upward. Congress backs down. The Economic Recovery Tax Act passes later that year. Massive upper income and corporate tax reductions. The top marginal tax rate falls dramatically. Corporate depreciation rules get rewritten in ways that heavily favor large business investment structures. Financial markets respond instantly. Then PATCO. 11,000 striking air traffic controllers are fired. The unions are crushed. And the signal sent to corporate America is unmistakable. The rules have changed. Then Garn Saint-Germain in 1982. Savings and loan deregulation. High-risk lending authority expanded. Interest caps are removed. Reagan signs it enthusiastically. And eventually over 1,000 S&Ls collapse. Taxpayer bailout costs exceed $160 billion. But more importantly, the conditions emerge for junk bond expansion, leveraged buyouts, manufacturing consolidation, ultimately financialization itself accelerating into the system we recognize by 2008. All of that was directly caused by the shooting? Well, not necessarily. But that's actually the point. You don't need conspiracy to observe acceleration dynamics. A violent shock creates political permission. The framework moves faster through the opening. And once again, the pattern holds. So why does this keep repeating? Not because there's a secret council somewhere orchestrating every event across centuries. The answer is both simpler and probably more unsettling. Institutional self-preservation. Every major policy framework has physical infrastructure attached to it. Defense contractors with decade-long procurement cycles, and congressional district employment dependencies. Intelligence agencies with assets, stations, budgets, and covert operations older than most administrations. Financial institutions with lobbying relationships built over generations. Law firms representing the same industries for 50 years. These systems don't disappear when presidents change. They adapt. They survive. They wait. And here's the critical thing. Institutional self-preservation doesn't require centralized coordination. No meeting, no memo, no smoke-filled room. When a president or political figure threatens actual infrastructure, not rhetoric, not surface politics, but real contracts, real budgets, and real financial architecture, those institutions react independently. But because they share overlapping survival interests, the response can appear coordinated. Sometimes the tools are nonviolent: scandal, media pressure, intelligence leaks, donor withdrawal, internal party sabotage. But when those tools work, that's usually enough. But occasionally when the threat level rises high enough and the other tools fail, more extreme options enter the equation. And afterward, what follows is usually not disorder. It's consolidation. The replacement framework emerges astonishingly fast. Budgets shift, contracts shift, agencies refocus. The structure that appeared threatened becomes stronger than before. Because violence creates political permission. A mourning public rallies around stability. Criticism becomes dangerous. And institutional continuity becomes emotionally necessary. So the violence isn't only removal, it's a mandate. And that's the mechanism. That's why the pattern repeats. Not because evil masterminds control history, because institutions almost always outlive the individuals threatening them. And the most important thing, this isn't confined to the 19th or 20th century. You can still watch the pattern operating today. Look at any politician, left or right, who presents a credible threat to deep institutional structure. Not slogans, not campaign theater, real institutional threats. audit the Federal Reserve, dismantle intelligence authorities, withdraw from active military theaters tied to massive contractor logistics, break up financial institutions funding both parties, reopen classified files tied to older operations. Watch what happens next. Sometimes the politician moderates after entering office. They receive briefings. They discover complexity. They begin governing inside the framework they promised to dismantle. The framework absorbs them. Other times, the neutralization becomes louder. Scandals surface. Leaks appear. Donor networks redirect their money. Former allies suddenly become critics. And sometimes, rarely but historically it exists, something more permanent occurs. And notice something important here. The pattern isn't ideological. Lincoln, Kennedy, RFK, Reagan, McKinley. Different parties, different belief systems. What matters isn't ideology, it's threat level. Does this person threaten the contracts, the budgets, the intelligence infrastructure, the financial architecture operating beyond electoral cycles? If yes, the pressure arrives. Those who serve the framework get protected. Those who negotiate with it get absorbed. Those who threaten it directly get neutralized. That's the operating rule. Not officially written anywhere. It doesn't have to be. It's institutional reflex. It's operating right now. The ledger is still active. History books give you dates, names, photographs, funerals, eulogies. They give you the myth layer. What they usually don't give you is the ledger. Who held the contracts before and after? Whose budgets expanded afterwards? Whose financial interests survived the transition? That's the thread we've been following right here. Lincoln dies. Reconstruction collapses into debt infrastructure. The plantation system reorganizes under new legal language and survives economically for another century. McKinley dies. Roosevelt transforms American foreign policy outward almost immediately. Canal infrastructure, naval expansion, financial enforcement architecture across the hemisphere. Kennedy dies. NASM 263 becomes NASM 273 in 4 days. Vietnam escalates. Defense procurement explodes. Robert Kennedy dies. The coalition fractures. The Democratic Party financially realigns away from labor and toward neoliberal consensus. Reagan survives, but the political opening after the shooting accelerates tax restructuring, deregulation, union collapse, and eventually the financialized economy that leads towards 2008. And every entry connects. Not because one hand wrote every chapter, because the same institutional forces respond predictably whenever existential threat appears. Financial power, defense procurement, intelligence infrastructure. The names change. The reflex, it stays the same. Overwhelming pressure followed by framework consolidation. That's the hidden force. Not a secret bloodline, not a council in a castle somewhere. Institutionalized self-preservation, operating at continental scale across generations. No memo, no meeting. Just the same playbook running again and again. So the next time a political figure steps forward with a serious threat to deep institutionalized structure, don't just watch the speeches. Watch the response. Watch how fast it arrives. Watch what changes afterward. Watch the framework emerges on the other side. Because the ledger is still open. And the next entry is already being written. This has been Hidden Forces in History. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. If you want to understand how this playbook operates in real time, the financial architecture, the intelligence relationships, the contractor network still shaping policy now, that's what this channel exists to document. Subscribe, and we'll keep reading the ledger together.